this video, I'll explain what it means to be unbiased in statistics. I'll show you what an unbiased estimator is, and I'll explain the minimum variance unbiased estimator. That's an MVUE. In everyday life, we use the word bias to mean there is a tendency to believe that some people, ideas, etc. are better than others. That usually results in treating some people unfairly. That's the Merriam-Webster definition. In statistics, the word bias and its opposite, unbiased, means almost the same thing as the dictionary definition, but the definition is a little more specific. If your statistic is not an underestimate or an overestimate of a population parameter, then that statistic is called unbiased. So what can you do to ensure unbiased data or sampling distributions? There are many steps you can take to try and make sure your statistics are unbiased and accurately reflect the population parameter you're studying. Take your sample according to sound statistical practices. For example, you might use random selection. Avoid measurement error by making sure data is collected with unbiased practices. This would include checking your equipment and looking for other measurement errors, and making sure any questions posed are not ambiguous. Avoid unrepresentative samples by making sure you haven't excluded certain population members. For example, you'll want to include minorities or people who work 2 jobs. One famous example of an unrepresentative sample is the Literary Digest voter survey. This predicted Alfred Landon would win the 1936 presidential election. If you haven't heard of him, that shouldn't come as a surprise because he didn't win. The survey was biased. It failed to include a representative sample of low-income voters who were more likely to be Democrat and vote for Theodore Roosevelt. So what is an unbiased estimator? An unbiased estimator is an accurate statistic that's used to approximate a population parameter. Accurate, in this sense, means that it's neither an overestimate nor an underestimate. If an overestimate or underestimate does happen, the mean of the difference is called a bias. In more mathematical terms, an estimator is unbiased if theta hat equals theta. That's just saying if the estimator, for example a sample mean, equals the parameter, in this case that would be the population mean, then it's an unbiased estimator. You might also see this written as something like an unbiased estimator is when the mean of the statistic's sampling distribution is equal to the population's parameter. This essentially means the same thing. If the statistic equals the parameter, then it's unbiased. There is a more formal definition for bias. In other words, the difference between the actual and the estimate. For observations x1, x2 and so on, based on a distribution with parameter theta, and for d of x, that is an estimator for h of theta, the bias is the mean of this difference. So how do you get an unbiased estimator? You can get an unbiased estimator by avoiding bias during sampling and data collection. For example, let's say you're trying to figure out the average amount people spend on food a week. You can't survey the whole population of millions of people. You find the average amount people spend on a week is $70 a person. Is this an unbiased estimator? Possibly. It all depends on how you took your sample. For example, were your questions unbiased? An ambiguous question like, how much do you spend on groceries a week, might seem simple enough, but some people could take this to mean, how much did you spend this week on groceries? If it's the middle of the month, people might spend less. Or they might take it to mean, how much money did you spend on your household groceries this week? Be clear that you're asking per person and not per household. Was your sample chosen in an unbiased way? For example, did you use a probability sampling technique, like simple random sampling? Did you exclude any population members? For example, if you're performing an internet survey, you may be excluding the poorest 25% of the population who don't have internet. When you take multiple samples from a population, each of those samples will probably have different statistics. For example, a slightly different mean or standard deviation variance. The MVUE is the statistic with the lowest variance. Unfortunately, there isn't a simple formula to find the MVUE, and it may not actually exist for your samples. There are two main ways you can find it. Both are quite advanced and require some knowledge of mathematical statistics. The first is to use the Kramer-Rao lower bound. Basically, this sets a lower bound for variance. If you can find an estimator that meets this condition, you found the MVUE. You can also find a sufficient statistic and then use the Rao-Blackwell theorem. Again, both of these are fairly advanced and I won't cover them in this overview of unbiased statistics, but keep an eye on my channel for videos coming up on those topics later. I hope you found the video helpful. Please take a moment to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video.